We had some breaking news last night out of the railroad industry that has necessitated a small schedule change. Not to worry, the two videos that were planned for today and tomorrow, they just got moved to next week. So you won't have to wait too long. So, whether you realize it or not, if you are paying attention to the Union Pacific's attempt to acquire the Norfolk Southern, you are watching one hell of a game of Monopoly play out right now. You really are. Last night, Union Pacific and Canadian National, a name most people have not seen in the mix regarding the Union Pacific Norfolk Southern merger, but Canadian National and Union Pacific jointly announced an agreement that has dramatically reshaped the politics surrounding Union Pacific's proposed acquisition of Norfolk Southern. We literally just talked about this a couple videos ago when in part two of the UPNS merger series I did that the politics does matter in this, and that's annoying, and a lot of us probably don't like it, and it is what it is. But the politics matter, and things have shifted a bit. This is probably the biggest development in the merger since the Surface Transportation Board rejected the original application earlier this year. My name is Mark Magana, and this is Railroad Economics. For months now, Canadian National has been probably they definitely have been the one of the most vocal opponents of the merger. CN has argued before federal regulators that Union Pacific's revised merger application still left important competitive questions unanswered. Well, that has now changed. Late Wednesday, the press release came out about 7:30 p.m. Eastern. So after the close of business, I don't know what that's. I suspect this will be both companies will probably open up tomorrow, but it's a really weird week because earnings are getting reported and stuff, and I the timing also doesn't necessarily become suspect, but why now? Why earnings week? Is somebody softer or weaker than expected? Is this gonna mask that? There's so many moving parts. But we can only go with what has been announced so far, and we'll see with earnings. But um, UP and CN announced they had reached a binding memorandum of understanding, which doesn't sound. If you work in real estate, that's kind of like a letter of intent. If I'm not sure what another analogy would be, but they're saying, hey, yeah, this is if A, B, and C happen, like the Norfolk Southern merger. If all that goes through, well, then we promise we will do X, Y, and Z. That's what Union Pacific is telling Canadian National, and Canadian National is like, well, that sounds pretty good, Union Pacific. Okay, so in return, Canadian National is saying they are no longer going to oppose the merger, and that doesn't mean. Notice the language there. That doesn't mean they're gonna like support it. But as far as the Surface Transportation Board is concerned, Canadian National is no longer opposing this. According to the announcement, Canadian National would receive operating rights between Tuscola and East St. Louis, Illinois. Canadian National would also receive rights to serve customers between St. Louis and Kansas City, Missouri. The agreement also gives CN access to certain shipping facilities where railroad competition would otherwise be reduced from two railroads to one, or maybe three railroads to two. They are doing this where it is commercially and operationally feasible. In addition, CN would acquire Norfolk Southern's ownership interest in the Kansas City Terminal Railway Company and the Terminal Railroad Association of St. Louis. If you are unfamiliar with those railroads, both are class three railroads. The Kansas City Terminal Railway, it's effectively a short line. They own about 95 miles of track and have a few leased locomotives. The Terminal Railroad Association of St. Louis is basically a switching operation that works the St. Louis Metro. Taken together, these concessions significantly expand Canadian National's competitive position in parts of the Midwest, and it preserves additional routing options for shippers. Union Pacific's CEO said the agreement reinforces the company's commitment to preserving competitive options while giving expanded access and operating rights to what he described as a quote tough competitor end quote. Very very scripted, very PR, but that is the name of the game right now. Now, his counterpart Tracy Robinson, the CEO at Canadian National, said the agreement would preserve competitive access to key markets, including Kansas City, while positioning Canadian National to provide additional options across North America. And this agreement would do that. So for so many of the people that were concerned of like, oh, we can only use one shipper, Union Pacific's going to jack up rates, and I'm not saying those things can't still happen, but they are at least presenting an alternative. You can still get your stuff from coast to coast without using Union Pacific theoretically. So, as we mentioned earlier, in exchange for these competitive concessions, Canadian National will end its formal opposition to the transaction before federal regulators. It is important to understand that this does not mean the merger will get approved. There is still a long road ahead. The agreement itself is contingent upon the Surface Transportation Board, and I'm talking about the UPCN agreement. It's contingent upon the Surface Transportation Board approving the Norfolk Southern transaction. So if that doesn't happen, none of these things happen for CN. And if regulators reject the merger, this is null and void. But politically, this is a very important development. Canadian National was probably the second loudest voice opposing the merger. Removing that opposition eliminates a giant obstacle and sends a signal that at least some of the competitive concerns can be addressed through negotiated settlements rather than outright rejection. This 100% does not mean approval is guaranteed. The Surface Transportation Board will conduct its own independent review, and other railroads, shippers, labor organizations, public interest groups, you name it, they are still going to continue presenting their own arguments. But yesterday's announcement absolutely does change the landscape. One of the merger's most prominent opponents has now become a participant in a negotiated settlement. If you haven't realized it yet, there is one hell of a game of Monopoly taking place right now. That is essentially what we are watching. Think of it this way, and I'll choose the yellow properties on the Monopoly board because Union Pacific is yellow. And we'll use the red ones to represent Canadian National because they have a lot of red in their logo, right? So you know, Union Pacific is saying, "Hey, I want Marvin Gardens. I already have Atlantic and Ventnor. I want Marvin Gardens." And Union Pacific maybe they have Kentucky. So they call up Canadian National and they're like, "Hey, you have Indiana and Illinois. Would you like Kentucky? Well, stop getting in the way of my deal to acquire the other yellow one from these other guys, and I will give you Kentucky." That's that's kind of what's going on here. This is, and I said it yesterday, whether or not this deal goes through or not, this is one that will be studied for decades. There truly is one hell of a game of Monopoly taking place right now, and this will be studied for a long time. Previously, we had discussed the Surface Transportation Board. It might not be a rubber stamp yes or no. It probably won't be. And this was before this breaking news, but we thought, well, they might say yes to Union Pacific, but they might also stipulate some things like, hey, Okay, but this line and this line, you got to sell those, or you have to do X, Y, and Z. They have a broad range of tools at their disposal. They don't just have to say yes or no. And we speculated some of this might benefit some of the short lines. We might see some new short lines, which will be cool. Some of the class two operators, certainly in the part of the country I live in, depending how this shakes out with Norfolk Southern, this could be something that might work out really well for a railroad like the Wheeling and Lake Erie. We just don't know yet. But Union Pacific is playing the game masterfully, it would seem, and good good on them. Whether or not you agree with the merger, you do have to acknowledge when somebody is playing the game very well, and they seem to be. My name is Mark Magana, and this has been Railroad Economics. Thank you so much for watching, and we will continue to monitor and cover one of the greatest stories out of the railroad industry in the last 30 years for sure. It's certainly, the story is not over, and it is certainly going to continue to be very interesting.